While practicing for SAT math, here are some of the lessons that I learned that really helped me solve problems a lot faster. These difficult questions that I thought I needed to know so much more formula than I actually did, I was able to boil down and simplify to these simple methods that you can just memorize to fully understand how to do these problems. Now, I never made huge mistakes doing these, but they would always take so much time, right? It would take so much time for me to finish the problem, and that ended up being the biggest issue. So if you learn these methods, not only you're going to save time during your SAT, you're going to save time just learning how to do these methods overall and the effort that it took me to figure them out. Now, a 1600 scorer would have fully memorized these methods. And in fact, they don't even think about the longer way to do it. The easy way is just intuition. They've practiced the SAT so much that they just know how to do it. But they weren't always that way. Hi, I'm Karthik, and these are simple methods for hard questions specifically for SAT math. Now, here are an example of just some formulas that aren't on the SAT formula sheet at the beginning that are going to save you points if you just memorize. And keep in mind for math, one of the things that I always mention as like a framework for the whole exam is that there's always an easy way and a hard way. There's always more than one way to solve a problem, but one is always going to take longer than the other. There's never two ways that are almost equal, and it always depends on how you do it as well. Sometimes methods you might find easier might be harder for other people, but there's always an easy and a hard way. And here are a list of some of the formulas that I found are extremely helpful and actually definitely necessary for you to even operate on the math SAT. So the quadratic formula, you obviously have to know. There are questions that directly ask you what are the roots of this equation, and there's no way of knowing unless you know the quadratic formula. So you need to have that memorized, and you need to have every single point to the equation memorized down to like where the plus minus is, where the square root. You need to know everything. It's not going to be on your sheet, right? Now, vertex form for quadratics. Well, you might know how to use quadratics and use it in the regular formula, but you need to know vertex form because there are a lot of questions that actually ask you based on the vertex, and just knowing vertex form for quadratics just makes it so much easier to solve those kind of problems, right? And difference of squares is just a simplification concept, right? If you have a minus b all in parentheses squared, like the way to simplify that, that's difference of squares. And just knowing that can help you do problems of simplification so much easier. It just cuts down all the time that's needed. And when you have that concept ingrained and all the special cases of simplifying quadratics, that just makes solving these problems so much easier. And now the next two are kind of related. The circle formula, right? How you write the formula of a circle in the Cartesian platform, and Cartesian is just XY coordinates. How you write the circle formula with an XY equation, and completing the square, right? This is how you actually turn a regular equation into like a circle formula when it's just given to you. If you want to turn it into the actual formula so you can find where the center is and what the radius is, you need to know completing the square. Now, here are some examples of questions that directly use this concept. Now, the first one, it's like, and pause to read all the questions. I really suggest that you do so, but the quadratic function is used to model height in feet of an object above the ground, and it's launched, right? And it's launched from 0 feet. So we know at 0, 0, the point exists, and we know its maximum height, right? The peak of the quadratic curve at the very top is 784 feet. So that's the Y value because we're measuring height, and it's 7 seconds, right? So we know that that's the middle point of the quadratic. So we know the vertex. So essentially you can use vertex form, right? Which is very simple. You just plug in those points, and then we can plug in the point 0, 0 to find out what the like vector of change is, like how rapidly it's growing. And I believe in this question that vector is 16. And then you can plug in 3. And then you can easily find your answer if you know vertex form. But if you don't know vertex form, this problem takes like 5 minutes. Right? Now, equation of the circle, right? In this top right one, like that equation might seem extremely difficult, but if you know completing the square and you know the circle formula, you can transform this equation into a circular equation and then find the radius very quickly. You see, these are difficult problems, but just knowing the formulas makes them so easy to solve, right? And this expression right here, you can easily solve that with difference of squares at the bottom, and you do it twice, right? Whenever you see x to the fourth, just know that you might have to do difference of squares twice, and that's the only reason that it's there. Now, the plug-in method. And this is an extremely common one and you might already know it, but here's something that I found out. You don't use this to just solve problems. You can use this to solve problems, but there are so many other ways that this is like a much more essential tool, right? You need to use this to figure out if your answers are correct. Answers that you're unsure of, you need to figure out if they're correct by using this method. Now, if you have time, of course, you use this method, but if you're just unsure of a question, you can guarantee that like the answer choice that you picked was wrong or incorrect just by plugging in the answer choices. And I'll show an example of this, but you can also use it to just get answers much faster. So on the left is an example of how you can get the questions done much more correct or done much more quicker, right? So just pause and read the question real quick. $1,000 plus 10% commission, and then 500 plus 20%. So Y is eventually going to overtake X. And if you look at the answer choices, we have 5,000 and 1,500 as the two benchmarks. So all we really need to do is figure out between those two benchmarks, which one goes higher than the other, right? We need to figure out in which plan, right, does salespeople on X earn more than on Y. So all we need to figure out is the vector in which that they're different. And you can do that just by plugging in values for D and just quickly calculating what it is, right? And for the next one, you can easily solve that with, the differences between both of the equations. You can subtract them both, or you can add them both and then just figure out what it is. So I'm quickly going to solve it here. I think X is 2 and Y is 2.5, right? That's my guess. And now I'm going to plug it in and see if it works. So I'll do the bottom one first. 8 minus 7.5 equals 0.5, correct. And then negative 6 plus 10 equals 4, right? And I just like solved that in my head and I wasn't too sure of it, but I was able to make sure that it was correct by plugging them back in. And that guarantees that you get the question correct. And for those questions like question 19 that doesn't have the answer choices and you have to fill in the blank, this is so useful to make sure that you've gotten the question correct, right? And I see it's only asking for Y and you only need to answer Y. And if you're confident you know how to do it and you could answer Y, then go for it. But if you're not that confident, then you can just use this method to figure out that you've gotten both of them correct. Now, changes in formula based on another. Now, this concept is extremely hard to explain, so I just have this problem here. Pause it to read. But the volume of the sphere, right, is 20, and then a volume of another sphere, the radius is 2 times the radius of sphere A. So I have one of the radius is R, and the other radius is 2R. Now, what is the volume of sphere B? Now, you might be thinking you need to solve for the radius and then multiply it by multiply the radius by 2 and then completely solve the problem again. But this wastes so much time and it's actually so easy. If you look at the left over here, I always mention that there's an easy way and a hard way. Look at the scale of the change, right? The sphere formula is on your SAT and you'll notice that the only metric there is R, right? That's the only thing that's really changing. It's the radius, right? So if we can figure out what the rate of change of the radius is in the formula, we can figure out what the answer is. So we know that sphere A is 20, right? So, and then we also know that R is changed by a metric of 2. So if we just take 2R, right, as the value of the radius and cube that all together, we get 8R cubed. And we know that R cubed is already in the answer for like sphere A, right? Sphere A is the regular R cubed value, but sphere B is 8R cubed, right? So despite like, obviously there's pi and there's the fraction involved, but just the factor of change, the only thing that's changing is the radius. So it's actually just an increase by 8. It's actually just 160 because you just multiply by 8. That's the factor of the change that's happening. So always look for these simple changes in formula. If there's only one factor that's changing, you don't need to solve for R. You can just multiply by the value that it's changing. Now, I'm going to conclude this with this idea. And you might have clicked on this wanting some tips that are really going to help you and some things that are going to help you solve these hard problems. And all the things that I mentioned they will get you to solve these harder problems much easier just by knowing these formulas. And knowing the ideas, it's going to give you points quicker, right? But a high score is never easy. It's never going to be easy. You need to apply these methods, but you also need to practice them so you know them. Memorize the formulas that I told you, and that's when you master them. You master them after having a strong grasp of using them and knowing how to use them in any scenario, right? And you're going to increase your score by doing this, but you should always try to improve your ability to actually learn the math itself, right? Learn what the question is asking you and learn the math concept. If you don't know how to answer the question, don't rely on these quick hacks. Try to understand the question itself. Now, I'm offering SAT prep, and you should apply because I only have a limited amount of spots left. And click the link in description and apply if you're interested. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you learned something today.